Welcome back to Organized, the business law breakdown. I'm Professor Seth C. Oranburg, and we're talking about corporations this season. And in particular, we're going to talk about corporations' feature of separation of ownership and control, one of the three superpowers that I've described. The general corporate powers or features that might make one choose this form are its limited liability, its perpetual existence, and its separation of ownership and control. So let's dive into that third element, because at first it might seem like a weakness. To be an owner of something you don't control might seem like a disadvantage. Why would you invest in a organizational type where you give up all your control, where instead you could invest in a partnership and maintain more significant voting rights and control and the ability to cause that business to act? I mean, if you're a partner and you want to buy copy paper for that business, you go to the store and you buy copy paper on the partnership's account. You don't have that power if you are a shareholder. Yet we see a lot larger corporations than we do large partnerships. So what's going on here? Why is this seeming flaw actually a strength? Well, what we'll explore today is that the separation of ownership and control is not some unfortunate accident. It's a deliberate feature that underpins the stability, efficiency, and long-term growth of modern corporations. In the early 20th century, Berle and Means, two scholars, revolutionized our understanding of corporate law by highlighting that in modern corporations, ownership is widely distributed, while control is concentrated in the hands of professional managers and directors. And the separation is not a design flaw, but a necessary adaptation to a rapidly growing economy where individual shareholders cannot monitor every managerial decision. Think of it this way. While individual shareholders are like silent partners who contribute capital, the board of directors and the executive management are the specialists, the captains and officers of the corporate ship. Their expertise and focus allow the company to navigate complex markets, pursue innovation, and respond swiftly to challenges. If you've ever been in an organization that has 100 voting members, you know how long it takes to get everyone to make a decision, as compared to when you have one person who is in charge. In essence, the separation creates an environment where decision-making is delegated to the corporate person best qualified to handle it. The shareholders get something in return, not only the optimized decision-making, but limited liability and diversified risk, because since they don't have to pay attention to all this stuff, they can invest in many more organizations. And they can get rid of some of the risk associated with any one company, its idiosyncratic risk, by investing in dozens or hundreds. And so modern corporate structures are built to embody the separation. Shareholders invest their capital, and then they do one important thing each year. They elect the board of directors. The board, in turn, acting as a whole, not as individuals, appoints a CEO who's going to manage the day-to-day affairs, as well as appoint other executive officers who run day-to-day operations. This multi-layered or hierarchical system allows for specialized roles and centralized decision-making, which is especially critical in large, complex enterprises. Consider a publicly traded company. Millions of investors own relatively small portions of the company. Direct involvement in every decision would be impractical and inefficient. Instead, by delegating authority to professional managers, the corporation achieves economies of scale and a rapid response to market dynamics. Even closely held corporations adopt a similar structure. In closely held companies, the same individuals might appear on both sides of the equation. They have a formal separation, even though the same person might be an owner and a manager. They wear different hats, so to speak, and they need to respect these different formalities. This helps because they could change one of those roles and not the other. They can sell their shares while retaining their position as CEO if they're good at management, or they could delegate their role as chief officer to someone else while maintaining the ownership position. And they can have enhanced ways to have strategic decision-making with expertise rather than personal interest. The separation of ownership and control helps protect the company from short-sighted or self-serving decisions that could jeopardize its long-term success. Critics sometimes argue that separating ownership and control leads to managerial excess or a misalignment of interests. And while this is potentially true in theory, we will later in our corporate governance lectures talk about why corporations and how corporations have solved a lot of these agency problems. I'd argue that the separation is not about abandoning accountability, it's about enhancing efficiency and actually protecting shareholders who may not be the best people to manage themselves. Imagine for a minute a pure shareholder democracy where the shareholders did have control. And I've written about this. I call it a hyper-voting organization. And we see them sometimes with these new decentralized autonomous organizations. But imagine a corporation that you could invest in where every shareholder is empowered to vote on every single decision. Hyper-voting, a pure democracy. So, I mean, from the day-to-day operations to whether you buy premium or economy copy paper to major strategic shifts in whether you sell the company. At first glance, I can understand why this model seems attractive because don't people want power? Don't shareholders, who are the owners of the corporation, want to control what they own? That way there's no agency cost. You're not relying on anyone else to make your decisions. However, this notion quickly unravels under scrutiny. First, consider the problem of collective action. Publicly traded companies, shareholders are typically dispersed among thousands or even millions of individuals across virtually every time zone in the world, with a multitude of languages and cultures represented among them. Expecting each investor to engage actively and responsibly on every issue is totally unrealistic. The dispersion would give rise to a phenomenon known as the free rider problem, where each investor prefers to let others do the heavy lifting while still reaping the benefits of the company's success. Academic analysis has shown that the cost of monitoring and coordinating among vast groups can be prohibitive, leading to decision paralysis and inefficiency. And a pure shareholder democracy opens the door to what you could call tyranny of the minority, where a system where every share counts equally, a small group of shareholders, even if they represent a minor fraction of the total, could band together to try to force decisions that serve their interests at the expense of the majority. And we actually see this with some ESG and CSR, environmental social governance and corporate social responsibility, actions where shareholders will get 0.02% of the stock of a company, and so long as they meet a minimum threshold, are able to dominate and take time at the shareholders' annual meeting to present issues that matter to them and not to the other 99.98% of the shareholders. And this way of running amok because of tyranny of the minority can absolutely destabilize corporations. The very challenges of pure shareholder democracy are also replicated in our democracy, where we have a representative democracy in America, what we'd call a republic. Can you imagine a world where every decision that every government ever made required a vote by every citizen? If you picture that for a moment and it terrifies you, you now understand why we can't have pure shareholder democracy in corporations either. And so these challenges show why corporate law has evolved to separate ownership from control. Professional management, appointed by a board of directors, mediates between the many dispersed investors and the complexities of running a large organization. Some advantages include efficiencies, because specialized managers can respond swiftly to market changes. They can quickly allocate resources efficiently, and they can pursue innovative strategies, which are tasks that are impractical for a vast, uncoordinated shareholder base. It mitigates free riding, where a centralized board is responsible for and can provide the necessary oversight and accountability that individual shareholders are unlikely to do. And it prevents tyranny of the minority, because when control is delegated to a board, mechanisms like director oversight and performance-based compensation help ensure decisions are made in the broader interest of shareholders, as opposed to being hijacked by a small group with disproportionate influence. In summary, while the idea of a pure shareholder democracy might appear to embody the purest form of ownership, it falls short in practice. The separation of ownership and control is not a bug. It's a carefully designed feature of the corporation to balance efficiency, accountability, and long-term strategic planning. By delegating day-to-day management to professionals, corporations avoid the pitfalls of free riding and tyranny of a small but powerful minority. Moreover, corporate governance mechanisms such as independent boards, proxy access, and performance-based incentives serve as essential checks and balances, ensuring that managerial actions align with the broader interests of shareholders. So as we continue to think through corporate governance practices, remember these lessons from both historical and modern analogs that while direct shareholder control might seem appealing, the market has spoken and said that separation of ownership control is the way to make corporations valuable. Thank you for joining me today on Organized. I'm Professor Seth C. Oranburg, and next time we're going to take a quick look at the future of the corporate form. I'll see you next time.